Okay, in the last video I was moving on to image size, but that's not quite correct. What needs to happen, so we'll go and start the action now. The first thing that we need to do is create a smart object for the background image, and that'll become obvious in a second why. Now moving up to image size, and we can make that 346, and you can see that it's 164. We need it to be 160, so we'll tidy that up in a second. Put this on bicubic sharper for a reduction. Makes a little bit of difference, not much. So now we've got it resized proportionally, and to finish off we'll do a canvas size of 160, and with this in the middle it will take some from the top, some from the bottom, and there we go. So that's the size that we need. The next thing, well, the first thing that I can see that needs to be done for this particular image is it needs to be sharper. These people here are quite blurry. So what we need to do is go up to Sharpen, Smart Sharpen. The good thing about smart layers, this converted to a smart object in Smart Sharpen, is it can always be readjusted. So for an image of this size, being quite small as a thumbnail, radius is around about 0.3. The amount should be full at 500 to begin with, and we can play around with these. Don't reduce any noise yet, that's fine. With the shadows, take the fade up to 100%. We don't want to sharpen the shadows. What we want to be doing is sharpening these highlights at the default of 100%. Oh, actually, hang on a sec. That should be, is it that way? Okay, so there, I think actually it's the highlights. I don't want to sharpen the highlights. Let's have a look at the preview. Yeah, I think that's right. So don't sharpen the highlights, sharpen the shadows. My mistake. Okay. And with that done, we want to affect this Smart Sharpen layer a little bit more by editing, right-clicking its blending options. Now if we go into here for the blending mode and select Lighten, that just makes it a little bit more natural, a little bit less harsh. What it's actually doing is sharpening now a lightening layer. So if I turn the, well, I don't know if you can see it or not, but I'll turn the layer off and I'll turn the layer on, and there's quite a dramatic difference in terms of its sharpening. Now there's only so many pixels here, it's only a small image, so it's never going to be amazing, but you know, it's a thumbnail, it's all good. Now the next things that may need to be tweaked are things like color, tone, etc. So we'll just start with them, and they're all in the adjustment layers down here. Now the biggest one was probably exposure. So starting with exposure, just moving these sliders around a little bit to just see if it can be enhanced a little bit more. Just keep in mind that screens light from the back. It's a backlit display, and if you push too far, it'll start to blow out things in the highlights. We don't want to do that, but we do want to just get the right amount of tones and brightness, so it's as bright as possible but things aren't blown out. So these white rocks here aren't blown out. So if I just turn that off and on, there is a little bit of an improvement there in terms of its brightness. The next one that you may possibly won't want to do. And these have all been color corrected, but now that it's resized, things change a little bit. The next one to do will be selective color. And the biggest one in selective color is the neutrals. And we'll start with black. And I'm just trying to bring back a little bit of tone there. These ones are very twitchy. They don't need a lot of adjustment. Now, as I said, because this has been color corrected before, this may be enough for most images. I don't think you need to go overboard, but if something really doesn't look right, you can go through all of these, and they all do something. And these ones, you basically sweep them from left to right. They're affecting a much smaller part of the image. So unlike the black, they can get swung a lot more. I can see that actually is starting to look better. Reds and yellows definitely are some of the bigger ones, particularly for trees. The trees are always quite difficult to get right, and I've spent a fair amount of time getting them right before. So, you know, is it real? Well, you know, like how it looks to probably not in real life, but how people see images and how they actually are completely two different things. So we just want to make it look like greens. Generally, there's not much in them, hardly anything. So cyans is going to be sky. Let's see. So I don't want to bore you with this, but some images you won't need to do this, but because I'm doing this as a demonstration, they nearly always seem to improve the more you tweak them. But I mean, I've done a lot of these images, so I do have a lot of experience behind me, but that's not to say that you can't learn how to do this. I mean, you may have done it already, but I can tell you now that I've got probably more experience in over the years and on the trip than most people in photo correction. But anyway, so you can see there, like that's affecting the sky. It's all about realism. So even if it's faded out a little bit out there, I mean, the temptation might be to make it very contrasty, but it needs to look real. It doesn't need to, we don't want these images to look so done that they look fake. They need to be boosted, but still have a level of realism to them. The whites is another one. So yeah, I'm getting back quite a bit there just by bringing that down. Things were starting to get blown out with the exposure before. So there's actually quite a lot. Different images will have a lot of change in some areas and not a lot in others. Every image is as unique as the image itself. Some images are quite easy to correct. Some images can be a damn right. They can take well over an hour I've spent on some images. It's due to, you know, photography on Instagram. People tend to, you know, they tend to take it at exactly the right time of day. Maybe like with a waterfall, there's no sun. It's easy to take a photo in those conditions. But when you're traveling, you don't have time and you just got to take the photo at that moment. You can get a lot of problems. You can get luminance issues where the rocks are really shiny. Colors don't look quite as good as they could. You know, sunset and sunrise obviously make great for photography, but most of these images aren't shot at those times. You won't find much in the magentas, so that's kind of it for that. So if I take off both of these and then put these both back on, you can see the difference that's had. So that's quite good. Is there anything else that I could do with this? Another one that you can try is vibrance. So it does tend to just quite naturally boost all the colors up quite well. Saturation never would go past, say, about 10 as a general rule of thumb. Sometimes you can get a little bit just in the 1 to 5 range, giving it a little bit of saturation, and then vibrance, and it's basically just playing around with both of them, seeing what looks best. So I don't want to go into it too much. Color correction, that's probably all you're going to need. Just having a quick look. Curves is another one. I will show you that. So in conjunction with the exposure, sometimes exposure is not quite the right one. If you put a dot in the middle, a dot down here, and then a dot up here, you can control very much like what's it called, exposure. But this one just does it in a slightly different way, and it can give you added. They're just more tools to be able to do the job. So that one there, so it's a bit contrasty down there. I don't know if you can see that. So I'm just going to pull it out as a final touch, pull it back into the realm of realism, and not make it oversaturated. Back in vibrance, it may be a little bit overdone. Might just pull it back on saturation. That's probably alright. So now if I take all of them off, you can see that it's lacking color, a little bit drab, and then boosting it, we're looking much better with that image. So that's kind of essentially a lot of what you need to do. Maybe one more, I don't know. This one I hardly use, so I can see that it may benefit from it, is the color balance. So we'll start with midtones. This, for very subtle hues in the color, it actually shifts them around. So it gives you a level of, another level of adjustment. You could just see that it was out a little bit. So to midtones, shadows, highlights. There is a lot more that I do to images, but as I said, these are just getting, they're already done, but they're just now in thumbnail form, so just needing that slight tweak because of the resize. So with that color balance, yeah, it was a bit washed out in the sort of the green area, and it's introduced a little bit more red into it. Yeah, okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. You can feel free to play with these. I would say the ones that you're not going to play with are solid color, gradient, pattern, levels, black and white, photo filter, channel mixer, color lookup. You're not going to use any of those. Invert, posterize, threshold, gradient, map. Not going to use any of them. It's mainly selective color, color balance. No, yeah, huge saturation. So sometimes things just look a little bit too intense in a certain color. So you can come into, particularly like with trees in the yellows, you can just bring it back a little bit so it looks a little bit more natural. So it's never touch the hue slider, it's always the saturation and lightness. So that maybe in the reds, with all of this area in here and on this rock, perhaps there might be some level of adjustment there. I actually don't mind it being pushed a little bit. Not completely natural, but giving it that final pop. Okay, so One thing I forgot to do was